Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Happy Friday. Happy second Friday of the month. I'm presenting live at Cancer Wellness Center. I'm Lori Bumbaco. I'm the oncology dietitian that works here and presenting to you one of my favorite programs. It's called Ask the Dietitian. It's such a great program because it allows our participants to ask me their questions related to the topic of the month. And it never fails. We have such great questions that are submitted. I get to try to answer them to the best of my ability in the next 45 minutes. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and present to you those questions and then my answers. If you've ever, if this is your first time attending Ask the Dietitian, have no fear because we record every single one of them. So if you go to our YouTube channel, Cancer Wellness Center, and you look under the history of the videos, you will see you can find any program that's ever been presented here, but especially Ask the Dietitian as well. So thank you for joining. I'm going to share my screen. If you're watching us on Facebook, welcome. Thank you. And I hope you're having a lovely summer and Friday. And I'm just going to get started on that presentation. Thanks for being here. So this month we decided to choose a topic that a lot of people ask me questions about. It's called reading. It's all about the food label, right? So we thought, let's help our participants understand and use that food label in a way that can help them make sense towards choices that are cancer protective. And as I shared in the introduction, it was no surprise. Our participants asked some great questions, so I'm going to get to them right away. So it's all about the food label, but I would say I have to use this opportunity to share. Even though we can use that food label to find nutritious options, there are some of the most nutritious options available to us without a food label. And so I shared a picture of a farmer's market, and hopefully you're taking advantage of this time of year, having such ample supply of some of the most delicious and nutritious choices that we could have in a cancer protective diet. And they don't have a label. They don't even need one because we know how nutritious they are. So on the agenda today, I'm going to list those questions first, provide the answers to the best of my ability. And then I always like to offer some additional resources. Hopefully you learned something from me today, but if you want to expand your knowledge on some of the concepts that I present, I offer you some trustworthy resources to do that. And then I always like to give recipes to those of you who have registered for the program. All right, so let's get to those questions. This month, there were a few that were similar, so I'm going to answer them together because they sound really very similar, right? What is the most important thing to look for on a nutrition label? What are the most important aspects to read? I'm going to sort of address that in that first response of mine. The next question, I'm always confused about the percentage. You're not alone. Please tell us the max amount of sodium, fat, and sugar in labels to look at for acceptable foods. How much sugar is good for a woman each day? How to spot the different ways sugars are named. What a great question. And what are guidelines for limits per day? Lactose in food. Is this a concern with the dairy sensitivity? Is food coloring generally safe? What are the fancy words on labels that disguise a product containing GMOs? And then lastly, what ingredients should I avoid while in chemo treatment and after? All really great questions, and I'm going to try my best to answer them for you today. So let's look at that first few questions that were very similar. What is the most important thing to look at on a nutrition facts panel or on a label? So I just want to go through the basics of the nutrition facts food panel, which this looks very confusing. So what I want to do is just point out, in my opinion, what are the most important things to look at. So the first is, I want you to start with the serving size, okay? Because that serving size matters. So it's in this particular food, for this label, we see a cup is the serving size. Now, here's the thing with the serving size. It's not a recommendation of how much you should eat or drink. If you feel like you want 2 cups or you want half a cup, that's all great. You get to decide, right? So you don't necessarily have to follow this as a recommendation. A dietitian can give you that information. But we do need to know the serving size because all of the other information on that nutrition facts panel is really representative of that serving size. So if we're looking at 1 cup of this particular food, all of the information below is for that 1 cup serving. You can compare the total calories to your individual needs if you want, and I'm going to expand on that in a moment. For general guidance, in terms of the percent daily value, which we're also going to talk about today, 2,000 calories is generally the amount used for the information here. Now, our age, our gender, our height, weight, our activity levels, and sometimes our disease states can influence this number significantly. And that's why working with a dietitian can help you decide what is the best specific number for you. So after you look at that serving size, that 1 cup, we're going to look at the nutrients, right? That's what we're after. So there are some nutrients that we are recommended to get less of. That is saturated fat, sodium, and not just any sugars, but added sugars. So we can find them on the label, thank goodness, right? So I've circled them just for reference, and we're going to talk about each of these. But eating less of this may help us reduce the risk for several chronic diseases. Eating too many added sugars specifically, we know is linked with the risk for excessive amounts of weight gain. So that may be of a concern for some of you. And then we're also going to use the percent daily value to help us make our choices, really to help us guide for what could be the best choices, but also to make some comparisons between labels. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. Okay. Now, there are nutrients to get less of, but there's also nutrients to get more of. Did you know that? So the experts want us to eat more fiber, vitamin D, and more minerals, calcium, iron, and potassium. And they are also found on the label, as you'll see here. Why are they asking us to eat more of these things? Well, first, because choosing more of the foods that have those are important for our health. And they're also known as shortfall nutrients because we are not eating enough of them, right? So we can do a better job. And that's partly my job, is to help you eat more of the foods that have those nutrients. And we can also use that percent daily value again for guidance. I'm going to talk about that. So the most important component is really whatever your health concern might be. Are you looking to add more fiber to your diet? Well, you can spot that on the label, right? And you can make some choices there. Do you, like most of us, need to reduce the salt in your diet? Well, that we can use the label for that. Maybe you're looking to cut back on the extra added sugars that you happen to be eating. The label can help with that. Sometimes you might feel like you have a need for all of the above and plus more, right? So I would recommend then to definitely work with a dietitian, because right now you're kind of compounding a lot of problems, and a dietitian can help you identify what might be sensible in terms of a sustainable approach and something that's realistic and really going to set you up for success long term. So we might pick and choose one thing to work on at a time and then take a stepwise approach there. And a registered dietitian, of course, can help do that. Now, for those of you who get these slides, who have registered for the program, you're going to click right on this link. And it's also going to help talk you through understanding the nutrition facts panel a little bit better than I have time for today. But also maybe you found that you want to increase the fiber in your diet and you want to dive deeper into that topic. Well, if you click on this link, it can help you understand how to use that a little bit better. The next question, I think, is one of the best ones, and it's probably going to be the longest one for me to answer. So I'm going to do my best. Like, what is the deal with the percent daily value? Why is that? Why does it seem so confusing? Well, the percent daily value is helpful because it can help us determine if a serving of a food has either a low amount of a nutrient or a high amount of a nutrient. So in the purple on this label, we see the percent daily value. Now, the numbers below, we're not looking for them to total like 100 or something. It's just representing for that particular nutrient from left, it reads left to right. So if we start with total fat, 9 grams, that's 12% of the daily value of a 2,000 calorie diet. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a little bit better. Okay, the daily values are a reference number. So it's the amount of that nutrient that experts think we should be consuming, or like a target, right? So we're looking to try to eat that amount, but no more than that amount each day. The percent daily value is how much that serving contributes to the total amount of that nutrient we need for the day, right? So let's say again, for the total fat, if it's 12%, that's 12% of the 100% target we're looking to aim for that day. Okay. So this 1 cup would give us 12% of our 100% value for total fat in the day. Hopefully I'm explaining that okay. It's not the most straightforward concept. You'll see here something like sodium, 37%. This is a good example. So 37% of 100%, right? So that sounds like a lot in 1 cup, if you ask me, but we're going to talk about that more. We're going to use these numbers to make comparisons with other products because maybe there's the same exact food that happens to add less sodium or salt in their product. So we can make comparisons that way. And we can also make trade-offs, right? And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Now, we want to pay attention to the fine print. I mentioned this earlier. The daily values are a reference amount based on general nutrition guidance, right? So we see this fine print down here. The percent daily value tells you how much of a nutrient in a serving of a food contributes to the daily diet of 2,000 calories per day. So that's very general, right? So all of these numbers are based on a 2,000 calorie diet. If you are eating more or less, which most people, I'm guessing, in the audience are, then guess what? That percent daily value no longer applies, right? Because if we're eating less than 2,000 calories, now those numbers are even higher, right? Because chances are we're going to need less of those nutrients because we're eating less calories overall. If we're eating more, then those numbers now are not reflective of the total of the day, right? So chances are if we're eating more than 2,000 calories, those numbers are now even lower for that person. Now, there are some exceptions, of course, because nutrition just likes to be complicated. So the exceptions for the percent daily value are for sodium, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. That's because no matter how many calories we are required to consume to support our health, we all need to be reaching for targets, especially for sodium, for fiber, and for vitamins and minerals. So we have a target limit no matter how much calories we're eating in a day. So there's a good rule of thumb, the 5 and 10% rule. This hopefully is the most helpful aspect of the percent daily value that you learned from me today. So if a nutrient has a percent daily value that is 5% or lower, it's considered to be low in that nutrient. If a nutrient has a percent daily value that is 20% or higher, it's considered to be high in that nutrient. So it stands to reason that if a 5% or lower daily value for the nutrient is there for a nutrient to get less of, like the trans fats or saturated fats, I should say, sodium and added sugars, this means it's a good choice, right? So for example, this 1 cup serving has 0% of added sugars. So we know that's less than 5%. It's low. We're good. This is working for added sugars if added sugars are on our radar, right? Now that 20%, if that is 20% or higher for the nutrients that experts want to get more of, like fiber or our vitamins and minerals, this is also a good choice, right? So 25% for calcium, wow, that's a quarter of what we need in a day for our calcium requirements. So this is a good choice for calcium if calcium's something on our radar. Okay, so use that 5 and 10%, or it really should be 20%. I'm so sorry, 5 and 20% rule to help you decide if this choice is low or high in a nutrient. The percent daily value allows us to have nutrition trade-offs. So I think this is the best part about using this information. It gives us the power to make some decisions, right? We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to put so much pressure on ourselves to follow the rules and do this and don't do that. This gives us flexibility, right? So we might choose something that is high or low in a specific nutrient, but then plan out the rest of our day, right? So for example, this particular choice has 30% of the daily value for sodium in 1 measly cup, which is not a big serving, right? The rest of the day, we can be mindful and really start to pay attention to how much sodium we're eating, right? And maybe we can cut back elsewhere in order to accommodate this relatively high choice for sodium. Some nutrients don't have a percent daily value. Maybe you picked up on that. So trans fats as well as total sugars and protein do not have a percent daily value. That's why you see it's blank and purple on this label. So we're going to use the grams of protein as a guide. And again, that's where a dietitian can help you. So if this serving has 15 grams of protein, does that sound like a reasonable choice for you? You know, only a dietitian can help you make that decision, really. Now, grams of trans fats and total sugars are also helpful if we're looking to make some comparisons. We are advised to eliminate or avoid trans fats as much as possible. As we've learned, the food industry is now banned from using trans fats in the food supply, and that was as of 2018. So sometimes trans fats are naturally occurring, so we might find them kind of lingering in some of our foods, but really we've discovered that trans fats are something that is really not beneficial for us at all. So we need to try to minimize our consumption of them, and that's why they're banned from being artificially added to foods. And we don't have a daily requirement for total sugars. Total sugars are naturally occurring in foods like whole grains or like in dairy or in like fruit. And they would be considered a type of a carbohydrate. They're just naturally occurring, and we don't really have we don't have a need per se for them. We have a need for carbohydrates, but not for total sugars. And that's why there's just no percent daily value. So the basics, just to kind of summarize the percent daily value, it's helpful for planning our total day. So it gives us some flexibility to choose. Use that 5 and 20% rule to learn. 5% is low. So this is great for the nutrients that we need to eat less of. If we have 5% of a choice in fiber, which we know fiber is something we need to eat more of, okay, that's low in fiber, but maybe the rest of the day we can try and choose some foods that are higher in fiber. But that helps us decide in that food it lets us dive deeper into that food to know really what is the nutrition in that food. 20% more or more is high, right? So it's great for the nutrients that we need to eat more of. So if we see something is 20% the daily value of fiber, we know this is a high fiber food, for example. Now, if you want to expand on this a little bit more, you need to kind of refresh as you go along. There is a link directly to learn more about the percent daily value that will take you to that information. Next question, please tell us the maximum amount of sodium, fat, and sugar in labels to look for. What's acceptable? So let's use that label again. So for sodium, the experts want us to eat less than 2,300 milligrams per day of sodium. And remember, that is regardless of the number of calories we're eating. We all should be trimming back to 2,300 milligrams per day. A little quiz question for you. How many teaspoons of salt equals 2,300 milligrams of sodium? Some of you might know that. It's a little bit of a trick question. Only 1 teaspoon. Is that a shock to you? It's a shock to most people. So good to know, right? But I would say even if we're adding salt in cooking, that's not where we get most of the sodium in the American diet. We're getting it from highly processed foods. And this label is the perfect example of that, right? There's 850 milligrams in this 1 cup serving. Now for fat, experts suggest that we get a range. And this is, again, where a dietitian could help. We have room to, like, a little bit of wiggle room here. So we can get 20 to 35% of our calories to come from fat. Saturated fat is something we want to be more concerned about. So the experts have cut a target off there in that less than 10% of total calories to come from saturated fat. Now remember, the percent daily value considers 2,000 calories as our general guidance, right? So if you're someone eating 1,500, 1,600 calories, that number that we see on the label does not reflect the number we are recommended to be eating. And that's why a dietitian can help. So why saturated fat instead of total fat? Well, we've learned that other fats like polyunsaturated fat and monounsaturated fat are actually helpful for us. So if we're looking to reduce any fat, it would be saturated fat only. And in that wiggle room of total fat intake, we're looking to try to play with our proportion and distribute the mono and the polyunsaturated fat to be greater, right? Rather than the saturated fat. So if we're eating the 2,000 calorie diet, that would be 22 grams per day. So this particular choice has 4.5 grams in that 22 gram limit. That sounds like a lot to me, right? It's like almost a fifth, right? It's more than a fifth. So that 23% That was a good test on percent daily value. That's high, right? Remember the rule of thumb, 5 and 20. So that 23% is high if we're eating if we're eating a 2000 calorie diet. If we're eating a 15 or 1600 calorie, that number is even higher, right? So some experts, I hate to share even more bad news, some experts recommend that we limit saturated fat to 5 or 6% of total calories. So imagine we're cutting that number in half. So where do we find saturated fats? In animal foods, but it's also solid at room temperature. So if you think about butter, it's a perfect example. That's high in saturated fat. Now, most Americans exceed the recommended limits for saturated fat. No surprise there. And why is it a problem? This is really what I wanted to get to. It's associated with when we consume too much of it over the course of time, it can raise levels of inflammation. It can also raise LDL cholesterol. And I'm going to get to sugars next by answering this question, because I know that was asked in that first question. So how much sugar is good for a woman each day? I want to answer for both men and women in this one. All right. So not just sugars, but added sugars. That's the operative word there. So added sugars are what we're looking for, because these are the sugars that are added literally during the processing of foods. So they also are found in foods that are packaged as sweeteners like honey and syrup. Those we consider added sugars. They're all lumped together. Added sugars are different than the naturally occurring ones, like the natural sugars or total sugars that you see on the label. That's in fruit and vegetables and in milk. Which foods are the top sources of added sugars in the American diet? I'm going to give you the top 3. Sugar sweetened beverages, desserts and sweet snacks, and then coffees and teas with the sugars that are added to it. That's where most Americans are getting their added sugars. So it's a good opportunity for you to kind of do a little inventory about your food choices. And are those the things that you're eating? Because chances are, if you are, you're having a lot of extra added sugars. So here's what the experts recommend: that we limit total added sugars to less than 10% of calories. So on a 2000 calorie diet, that would be, if we did the math, 200 calories or 50 grams of added sugar or 12 teaspoons of added sugar. This is, again, where a dietitian can help you. Some experts recommend even less than that 10%. I'm kind of in this camp. So they might set a goal of less than 5% of total calories. So imagine with those numbers above, we're cutting that in half again. So if we're working with numbers, 1 teaspoon of sugar is the same as 4 grams on a label. So this is a different label, and I chose this one specifically because I wanted to show you the added sugars in this 2/3 cup of a serving has 10 grams of added sugars. That's the equivalent of 2.5 teaspoons. That's high. And we also see the percent daily value there is 20%. All right, we know this is high. 20% on a 2000 calorie diet. Again, if you're eating less calories than 2000, these numbers are all skewed and they're going to be even higher for you. So for added sugars, why are we concerned about that? Well, excessive consumption can lead to weight gain. We know there's a direct link between the two. And with weight gain, this can increase our risk for some of our chronic diseases, including high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, even cardiovascular disease. But also, too, in the world of oncology, there's 13 different cancer types that are linked with excessive amounts of weight gain. How many teaspoons on average do Americans consume every day? What would you guess? 19 for men and 15 for women. So that just shows you right there, 15 teaspoons. That sounds like a lot of extra sugar, right? I have a lot of work to do. So we're going to talk about that. So if you're looking for specific targets without all this complicated work to do, or you don't have access to a dietitian, there's a great resource, My Plate. So for a 2000 calorie diet, it spells it out right there for you. Added sugars less than 55 grams per day. Saturated fat less than 24 grams a day, and sodium less than 2300. What if you're eating less and you're doing 1600? Well, the math is done for you here too. So less than 40 grams for added sugar, less than 18 grams for saturated fat. And just like I mentioned earlier, everyone should be eating low sodium, so less than 2300 milligrams per day. I'm going to give you a link to this My Plate website. It allows you to input your age, your gender, your height, your weight, your activity level, and it will spit out a plan for you based on that. It's almost like access to a dietitian. It's never going to replace a dietitian though, but it's good to get this number for you. All right, so how to spot the different ways sugars are named. Great question. Added sugars, again, is what we're looking for. So the nutrition facts panel is a simple tool, and we can use that to know now, right? Because we're going to zero in right on that added sugar on that nutrition facts panel. But you can also use the ingredients, because in the ingredients, you can't hide, right? You have to list what's in the product. So sometimes it might be obvious, but I would say for the most part, most manufacturers and products we find will use aliases to disguise those added sugars that are added or included in the processing. So the suffix ose, O-S-E, is one way. That's like almost a guarantee. If we ever see a word that ends in O-S-E, it's an added sugar. So examples are dextrose, fructose, or maltose. You've heard of high fructose corn syrup, right? That's a great example of an added sugar. So others might include agave, barley malt, brown sugar, corn sweetener, cane syrup, and corn syrup solids, fruit juice concentrates, fruit nectars, malt syrup, molasses, and turbinado. Some of those sound like relatively like benign, right? So now we know they are really technically added sugars, and experts want us to limit all of them. Okay. We can't avoid them. And I don't think we need to. That's the good news, right? But we just want to be mindful of targets and how much is too much. So finding added sugars, a little more information. How many different words are used? How many different aliases for added sugars? I love when the dietitian can ask the questions. 61, and some of you may know that as well. So there's actually 61 different terms that are considered to be added sugars. Geez Louise, right? So there's a great website, sugarscience.org. I include it in the presentation. There's a link at the end. But I'm going to send this nice little infographic out to those who registered for the program. It's in fine print, but you can see it in what you'll get sent in the email. You'll see the different 61 terms that are used. And a shocking 74% of the foods that we're consuming have added sugars in them. It's a lot. Is food coloring generally safe? I like this question a lot too. So food coloring, food dyes, there's artificial ones, and these are commonly used in very highly processed foods and other beverages to enhance their appearance and appeal to consumers, right? So it's interesting, a lot of the products that use artificial food colorings and food dyes are really marketed towards children. So they're bright and colorful and desirable. They're definitely not naturally occurring, right, in terms of their color. So good examples are red 40, blue 1, yellow 5, and yellow 6. Interesting names that they have for them in parentheses. Now, there are natural dyes. They're much more expensive, but they do come from plant and animal sources, and they are sometimes used in food processing as well. So you might see names like this included on the ingredients, like beet juice and turmeric and paprika. And if you've ever worked with any of those ingredients and you in your own kitchen, you might notice they dye your hands or the cutting board as well, right? What great use of food coloring, in my opinion, right? Because it's also nutritious. Now, what are the health concerns with food dyes? So the strongest evidence that we have right now, it's really linking consumption of food dyes with hyperactivity in children. Like, what do you know? That's where most of the food dyes are used and marketed towards children, and that seems to be where the problem is. So there was a diet that was created, I think it was back in the 90s, or it might have been the early 2000s. It's named after a physician, Dr. Feingold. And he developed this to help manage ADD and ADHD. I don't really know the specifics. And again, that's not what this talk is about today. But if you're curious to learn more, you can look up the Feingold diet to see how it might help, manage those two conditions. There's some concerns that maybe some of us are sensitive to food dyes or even have the extent of an allergic reaction. An allergic reaction is very obvious. And it seems like yellow, in terms of the food dye, is the most common allergic reaction that's reported in the research. There's concern as well about inflammatory bowel disease, and that there's a small amount of research studies that suggest that there might be a connection. Those research studies are based on animal studies, so that we always give pause to that because we're not animals, so we don't know if that's going to translate necessarily into the human body. Now, what about cancer? Well, the research about cancer and risk for cancer is mixed, and it's inconclusive at this time. Some studies have suggested that certain dyes may be carcinogenic in rats and mice. Um, some studies have suggested that it takes very high doses in order for those food dyes to be carcinogenic. So the dose might be the poison. The evidence in humans needs to be more extensive and consistent in order for us to draw some conclusions. Now, for most people I work with, like that's not good enough, right? So, I think it's important to know then how we can find food dyes and learn a little bit more about that. So anything that the USDA certifies as being organic is free automatically from food dyes. So you will see the label listed as organic, or you will see that seal organic. And that's one way to guarantee that it's not going to have those food dyes. If the label does say made with organic ingredients, it may have some food dyes in it. It has to be organic. Most unprocessed foods do not contain food colors, right? So we go to the farmers markets, that's a great example. But for those non-organic foods, or even those that are made with organic ingredients, we can use the label. And that's why this label, the nutrition facts panel, and the ingredients are very helpful for us because it gives us the information we deserve, right? So the USDA, the FDA specifies that the food containing any synthetic dyes must list them by name. So you will find them listed on the ingredients list. All you have to do is look. So the three most commonly ones that are used are red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6. That makes up about 90% of all the dyes used in our food supply. Now, if you want more information, I encourage you to explore the Center for Science and the Public Interest website. They have I provided the link here. They have a very nice comprehensive overview of actually all of our additives, not just food dyes, but other additives that are in our food supply and what they have found up until this point in time to be concerning or even not concerning about some of our food additives. But you'll see what they basically suggest with most of our food dyes that we generally try to avoid them. Some are more concerning than others. Okay, so if you explore that link and learn for yourself, I think in general, for most people I work with, they just rely on looking at their ingredients and looking to minimize them in general. What are the fancy words on labels that disguise a product that contains GMOs? So I just want to first go over GMOs just very quickly. So genetically modified organisms are plants, animals, or even microbes that have had their DNA changed to using genetic engineering techniques. That's a mouthful. All right, they're also sometimes known as bioengineered foods or genetically modified foods. They may take a gene with a desirable trait and insert it into the DNA of another food. And there's actually, did you know, there's actually some benefits to genetically modified organisms. So we have created some nutritious food like yellow rice that has turmeric in it, more tasty foods, but also some plants that are disease and drought resistant. So this is obviously more environmentally sustainable. Less use of pesticides, a really nice bonus there. Increased supply of food, that's debated, but it is listed as a potential benefit. And then also foods with more desired traits, such as potatoes that produce less acrylamide when it's cooked at very high temperatures, like in the fryer or burned on a grill. So all potential good things about GMOs. Now, the only thing is that GMOs can potentially cause an allergic or toxic reaction in some people. Some people are concerned that that's a concern that's out there, right? Another concern is that there could be unexpected or harmful changes genetically to the organism. Is there an inadvertent transfer of genes from one organism to another? Foods that are going to be less nutritious because of GMOs. But really, for the most part, every time I revisit this topic, most of these concerns have been unfounded. Okay, so the US, the FDA, the USDA, the EPA, the US Department of Agriculture, they all assess this, right? And they have found that generally they are safe for us and for the environment. Now, we don't have to just trust our government agencies. We can also look internationally, not only the National Academy of Sciences, who I regard pretty highly, but the World Health Organization and some other international organizations have found no evidence that GMOs are harmful for us. Okay, good to know. But guess what? It's still our right to know. So the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard was passed in January of 2022, so pretty recent. And it now requires that if any food has any detectable genetic material that has been modified through certain lab techniques and cannot be created through conventional breeding or found in nature, it has to be listed on the label. So we can find that, right? And this link goes in more detail about that information. But now that by law, a label is required to include this information. It must say on the label, it's a bioengineered food. It must use a bioengineered food symbol, or it may or must include directions for using your phone to find the disclosure. That one seems not fair, right? So the label, as you see here on this fictitious box of crackers, that's what the label is. That's what we can look for to find if it's a GMO food or a bioengineered food. So a little bit more about that. This link will bring you to that information about legislation that was passed by Congress. It's a little bit more in detail about that. So this is how we can find if a food has a GMO, right? So it contains a bioengineered food ingredient. You will see that literally printed on the label. You'll see that symbol, or it may include the QR code or a phone number. So we have to do a little bit of homework here. It sounds like a lot of work. I wish they were all required to just use that symbol. I think it would be so obvious. If we saw that symbol, we would know it was a GMO food. However, there is a very helpful agency. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called the Non-GMO Project. So I included that link for you, and it has a list of verified non-GMO foods. So it has a database you can search through filters, and you can find if you're curious about your bread, for example, is it something that is GMO or not? And I think it's a very helpful website. Next question, lactose in food. Is this a concern with dairy sensitivity? So lactose must also be labeled on food products that contain it, according to the FDA. It is a milk component and it's considered a food allergen. So there was, I'm not sure when this was passed, but that requires that legislation required that all U.S. packaged food clearly state if it contains milk on their labels. Other milk components that must be labeled include whey protein, skim milk, and milk solids. Some people have an allergy to those other milk components. Some people have an intolerance to the lactose. So lactose is typically the component of dairy that we're intolerant of. We're not allergic to it, right? But we over the course of time or through disease, we may develop an intolerance of a certain amount of lactose. Every single person will have a different tolerance level, right? So some people can not have a drop of lactose. Other people can enjoy their lactose if they're eating it with something else. So that's for you to kind of test out for yourself, or again, work with a dietitian to see what makes the most sense for you. Now, when it comes to lactose-free products, manufacturers are responsible, again, to ensure that their products are correctly labeled. And if it says lactose-free on the label, which usually that's the language you'll find, then it must be lactose-free. Lactose-free products cannot contain any lactose, and reduced lactose products must be labeled as well, but there's really no specific definition for lactose or low lactose, right? So it can still, if it says low lactose or lactose reduced, it's still going to have a little bit of lactose. If it is lactose-free, really, it most likely is lactose-free. Okay, that's been my personal experience. And this is our last question. Thanks for hanging in with me. So what ingredients should I avoid while in chemo treatment and after? What a great question. I can't answer it in this presentation. I don't know who you are. I have to know who you are. So I think the best nutrition guidance is personalized. So I would encourage this individual to schedule or to ask for a referral to an oncology dietitian. The services I offer here with a one-on-one consult and nutrition counseling are free if you're eligible. You can receive an individualized assessment and tailored nutrition care plan. Nutrition recommendations are really based on a lot of variables, and certainly we consider your medical history, your prescriptions, what your cancer diagnosis is, and then also the treatment plan. And then dietitians personalize the approach, right? So we have the nutrition recommendations, but how do we apply it to the individual? So we have to take into consideration someone's preferences or sensitivities or allergies. What is their level of their skill set in the kitchen? What access to foods do they have? then we can make a more personalized plan that's going to be achievable. And we have lots of tricks up our sleeves, lots of great ideas. So I just also want to share some additional links for information. The interactive food label is relatively new, lots of fun to explore. Believe it or not, I think it makes that label less intimidating and a little bit easier to read. The USDA My Plate, I shared with you the 2,000 calorie goal and then the 1,600 calorie goal. So that can give you the targets that you're looking for, which I think would be the most helpful information to answer those questions. And then I shared with you all those different names and words for sugars that are added to food. And this website, Sugar Science, can help you find them if you're looking to dive deeper into that. And then for those of you who registered, I was thinking of the summer. So I have a few recipes that I thought would really just kind of take advantage of what we have available to us, and a nice little grilled Caesar salad, nice little tortilla with some pistachio crema. Delicious. I've made it. And then a strawberry agua fresca. Delicious and refreshing. So our next Ask the Dietitian is scheduled for the first Friday in August, which is August 2nd. And our topic is diet and inflammation, a very popular one. So I'm sure our participants will rise to the occasion, as always, and give us some great questions that I can try my best to answer at that time. So I'm going to stop my share and just see if anyone has additional questions. I know there was something in the chat early. But just because now we should stop the recording.